Hello and welcome to part 2 of my Duotone Rebel range comparison. Please check out part 1 if you haven't already, where I discuss my time on the Evo D labs, and then start this comparison by covering the last couple versions of the Rebel SLS kites. Also, very quickly, if you like these reviews and want to contribute to me being able to make more, you can follow the link in the description to send me a little tip on the Give a Little page. All donated funds go right back into the reviews, of course. And once again, don't forget to check out Matt Kiteboarding to get all of your delicious Duotone gear. Now, let's get into the good stuff and take a look at what seems to be getting marketed as the new flagship performance big air kite from Duotone, the Rebel D Lab. Of course, after talking about the Evos and the Rebel SLS, this is where things start to get pretty interesting. I should first off start by mentioning that it would appear Duotone have put quite a bit of work to make this kite more durable than the Evos, as the kite feels a little bit heavier, certainly more robust, and you are now recommended to inflate them up to 10 psi. This added weight, like the North Ultra, does come at a degree of compromise to the potential performance, of course, but I can start by saying right out of the gate that I did overall find the D-Lab version of the Rebel an improvement and more enjoyable than the SLS. But to what degree and in what areas is where things get a little tricky. The Alula material is of course still Alula, so as I mentioned in part 1, what kind of shelf life it will have is hard to say, potentially beyond a year and a half, as I already know mine have lasted. Only time will tell on that front. On to the flight characteristics. First off, the bar pressure actually felt marginally heavier, or at least what you might call firmer than the 2025 SLS. But I would say this was more due to its improved responsiveness and your ability to feel more of the kite all at once due to the rigidity from the Alula through the frame. I noticed this with the North Ultra as well. There was added power, but the overall ability to feel more of the kite makes it hard to determine how much more bar pressure is from that or just being harder to move the kite around, of course. It was certainly within the margin of error from the SLS to the D-Lab, and not as noticeable as, say, the bar pressure increase from the Orbit Pro to Orbit Ultra. Moving the kite around the window was certainly more direct, and I'd say the kite was also faster through the window, but it certainly didn't feel as quick or direct as my Evos by comparison. The power felt improved, but still fairly similar to the SLS, and on this session I rode them both together back to back. Although I generally felt I was more powered and getting more lift or at least hang time on the D-Lab, I actually jumped higher that session on the SLS. But of course, the wind is never the same, and the jumps were all within 10% of each other on both Woo and Surfer. The D-Lab version would certainly get rewarded more often than the SLS with random gusts, giving you little boosts and bonus lift, and of course that also translated into a more impressive hang time. But once again, I don't think either of these areas are any better than my Evos, although there's perhaps an argument for the hang time on the Rebel. And because the Evo tends to move quicker, I would wager that a more experienced rider could actually jump higher on the Evo. Where the Rebel is superior though, is that it definitely has a larger sweet spot when you do go to send it. So although you might not have the same single jump or top few jumps in a session, on average most riders I would wager would jump higher on Rebels. To that point, I've actually noticed another local rider here who has just updated his Evo D-Lab quiver to Rebel D-Labs in the last few months. And this tends to be what happens with him. On average, he seems to be jumping a bit higher and more consistently high. But the highest jumps in his sessions don't seem to be getting quite the same level he would occasionally get when he was back on his Evo D-Labs. He does seem to be enjoying the new Rebels more, however, because it would appear like he tends to feel a bit more control over them overall, even though it's taken a little getting used to the increased yank on the loops. He is at the level where he regularly jumps late teens and early 20s, and does standard kite loops both ways, but is a bit older than me and not particularly interested in progressing kite loop rotations or variations. So I would say he is at the ideal level for people moving to the Rebel D Lab that won't be held back, perhaps, from progressing on them. In terms of looping, again, the D-Lab seems very similar to the SLS in that the Kite is a bit slower to the top loopers on the market and has a ton of yank in the loops. I felt like the D-Lab version engaged faster when you're going to send the Kite, but actually had more yank than the SLS. Likely a bit from the increased power, but also in the rigidity of the frame where the Kite won't be able to turn as quickly on itself. The SLS seems to have a bit more give, so you can crank the bar for a slightly softer loop, whereas the D-Lab there wasn't really much give at all in the Kite as you piloted it through the window. I would imagine this is because the SLS, of course, is a bit softer material that contorts more on itself, so when the Kite is going around the loop with a harder pull, it will give a bit more, whereas the D-Lab's rigidity seems to hold its shape better, which is of course good for jumping and hang time, but doesn't feel as friendly on the loops. I did feel this Kite was very well balanced between the bar pressure and its power through the loop, however, so I felt like I did know where the Kite was a bit more than with the SLS, and was able to pluck up the courage to try some rotations just for this edit, really. That's something it took me a lot longer to get the confidence for on my Evos. But I would have to say this courage also came from another year of progressing with all kinds of different kites as well. And as you can see from this clip here, I have gotten pretty comfortable looping my 10-meter Evo with rotations now as well. One somewhat annoying aspect I've found with looping this Rebel is that in the longer sessions with more wind, both myself and my mate I just mentioned have been noticing the joints in our elbows tend to get a little bit sore and tight around the 2 to 2.5 hour mark. Something I can't recall being an issue in the past year or so with my Evos or ever on my Orbits in the past, but I do recall getting similar issues with my old XR7s. I'm hoping that with time you would get used to the power and pull of the Kite and the wear it puts on your joints, and this would stop being an issue. But if you're getting a bit older like we are and have some joint pain already in that area, it's something to consider if you also like riding for longer lit sessions and doing a lot of loops. It is interesting to see the Duotone Big Air team riders swapping to the Rebel, because I don't find that it quite has the same overall performance as the Evo. I would chalk this up to either pressure from the brand, or potentially if you consider some of the recent trend in judging that I spoke about in the NXT review, that is somewhat leaning towards big single technical loops again with more height. So it does make sense because the Rebel would offer those riders a bigger sweet spot to boost high, similar lift and hang time to the Evo to get their tricks in, and most likely a lower average kite angle from just the slower looping speed of the Kite. I'm fairly confident you won't be seeing many double loops on this Rebel D-Lab, so I guess they will have to go back to the Evos if those tend to be scoring a lot higher in King of the Air this year. For your average rider, I think the Rebel SLS or D-Lab in sizes 7, 8, and perhaps 9 would be an easy ride for straight boosting compared to the Evo D-Labs, but perhaps not as easy for progress into kite loops as with the Evo. Neither these Rebels or Evos would probably be my picks for your first kite loops, of course, when compared to other kites like the Orbits or the recent Thrive from Harlem. In sizes 10 and up, however, it's hard for me to imagine too many advantages in any of the Rebels over the Evos, because they don't offer the same low end, they're heavier to use, and don't really offer too much, if any, more lift or hang time. With the 5 struts, they would be a little bit more stable in big winds in any respective size, of course, but the Evo, if still in good condition, is already exceptionally stable for a 3-strut kite due to the Alula, so it's not a huge difference or advantage there in my opinion either. So, in summary, I really enjoyed all of these Rebels and would likely take them over a lot of the other big air kites on the market right now, but thankfully for my wallet, they are not quite enough to make me want to jump away from my Evos just yet. If I didn't already have these Evos, or they got damaged so much that I would need to replace them, I would definitely still get another 10 or 12 meter Evo D Lab, I believe, and in the 8 meter size, I'm not 100% sure, but I might actually go for the 8 meter Rebel SLS over the Rebel D Lab, mainly because of the cost difference, but also the potential resale value and its lifespan, even though I do prefer the overall experience of the Rebel D Lab over the Rebel SLS, aside from the loops, I think. This, of course, is quite subjective, and with more time on both kites, I might just have to fork out the extra cash for the D-Lab version of the Rebel with further testing. My gut tells me I'd be even more inclined to stick with the D-Lab Rebel if I had a few more sessions on it in the 35 to 40 knot or more wind range, as with my recent experiences when I was testing the Orbits and my discovered passion for the Ultra in the New King winds. My ongoing fear with Lula, now after a year on it, is that I've also noticed that trying to sell Lula kites to the second-hand market is very challenging, at least here in our very small market, and you can't really blame people because the jury is still out on how well they will age, and we all know Dacron ages very well and is generally easier to repair. That said, once you've gotten used to riding Lula kites, it is really hard to go back, I must say. So thank you all once again for making it this far. Please like and subscribe for algorithm goodness, and fire some comments below with your experiences on any of these kites, and of course what else you would like me to get onto next. If you could also check out my Instagram, you'll be able to see a lot more clips around New Zealand and keep up with what other kites I am working on. So until next time, goodbye.